December 9, 1943, Bougainville, Solomon Islands. Rain drummed against the mangled jungle canopy as Corporal Henry Malloy lay pressed into the mud, his so-called mail-order rifle resting across his chest. Moments earlier, the platoon had laughed at the odd little weapon he'd assembled from parts shipped in a cardboard box. Now those same men waited for him to do the unthinkable. A Japanese sniper had just taken another Marine through the throat. The shot came from somewhere deep in a tangle of vines and blackened trunks, a place no one wanted to crawl toward. Malloy wiped the fog from his scope, steady hands betraying none of the danger closing in around them. A second sniper cracked a round past his ear, splintering bark inches above his head. The jungle fell silent. Malloy exhaled, lowered his cheek to the stock, and in that instant began the 4-day stretch that would leave 11 Japanese snipers dead, and every Marine stunned into silence. Before Bougainville swallowed him in mud and shadows, Henry Malloy had been just another farm kid from rural Oregon, quiet, wiry, and more comfortable fixing broken tools than talking about himself. His brothers joked that he'd skipped childhood and gone straight into tinkering, taking apart anything with screws just to see how it worked. But to the men who later fought beside him, one detail stood out more than any story about his upbringing. Malloy never liked standard-issue rifles. The Marine Corps shipped out thousands of Springfield 03s and Garand rifles, built to survive rain, sand, and careless handling. Malloy respected them, even trained with them, but he didn't love them. Too loose, he'd mutter while cleaning his weapon after drills. Good for war, bad for precision. His sergeant rolled his eyes every time. Precision wasn't a luxury in the Pacific. It was a fantasy. Heat warped barrels, humidity ruined scopes, and ammunition corroded inside sealed tins. Most Marines prayed their rifles simply fired. But Malloy had different expectations. Months before Bougainville, while stationed at a temporary depot in New Caledonia, he discovered that U.S. supply lists occasionally included optional marksmanship equipment, privately purchased scopes, custom-fitted stocks, and specialized bolts. These weren't issued widely and few Marines bothered with them, but they could be obtained through mail requisition forms if a soldier was persistent enough. Malloy was more than persistent, he was obsessed. Each payday he filled out another form, requesting one more piece of a rifle he envisioned only in sketches scribbled on the backs of ration boxes. The others joked that he was building a mail-order sniper rifle, a name that stuck the moment a wooden crate arrived bearing his handwritten requisition number. Inside lay a long-range optic far better than the one issued at the armory. Another month brought a precision-cut stock. Another delivered a bolt assembly modified for smoother cycling. Piece by piece, through humidity and boredom, Malloy tuned his rifle like a musician adjusting a handmade instrument. The laughs came easily at first. Marines would tap the crate with their boots and ask if he was starting a catalog business. Others teased him for believing a custom rifle would matter against jungle-trained Japanese marksmen. Snipers on Bougainville had already taken officers, radio men, and machine gun crews with chilling accuracy. They fired from impossible angles, disappearing before patrols could flank them. A rifle, no matter how finely tuned, wouldn't erase that threat, or so everyone believed. Yet Malloy didn't argue. He simply studied the forest and the way sound traveled through damp air. He spent evenings measuring wind drift even when there was no wind. He learned how to set his scope under shade so glare wouldn't betray him. And whenever the supply ship arrived, he checked for new crates as if waiting for medicine. By November 1943, word spread that the Japanese were reinforcing positions around the Numa Numa Trail, turning the jungle into a sniper's paradise. Platoons advancing inland moved with dread. Every fallen leaf seemed capable of hiding a muzzle flash. Veterans whispered about a handful of Japanese marksmen whose kill counts were already infamous. These snipers could hold entire companies in place for hours, sometimes days. Malloy listened quietly, tightening the final screw on his rifle. He knew the jokes were coming. He also knew something the others didn't. One shot, delivered with absolute control, could change everything in a place where even sunlight seemed afraid to touch the ground. And the day would come, sooner than any of them expected, when the platoon would have no choice but to trust the rifle they had once laughed at. The rain began before sunrise on December 7th, 2 days before the firefight that would etch Malloy's name into Marine Corps legend. The sky over Bougainville turned the color of bruised steel, and the jungle responded with a thick, breathless heat that settled on every helmet, rifle, and piece of skin like a second weight. Patrols slogged through trenches that filled faster than engineers could clear them. Every step sank ankle-deep in muck. Every sound, from an overturned canteen to a snapped twig, seemed loud enough to call down fire from unseen rifles. Malloy carried his mail-order rifle wrapped in an oiled cloth beneath his poncho, shielding it from the moisture as if it were a wounded comrade. His squad had grown used to the ritual, the careful unwrapping, the swift inspection, the quiet tightening of a screw or a mounting ring. They still joked about it, never cruelly but enough that Malloy heard the echoes even when no one spoke. On that morning the jokes felt thinner. Word had spread through the camp that 2 snipers had pinned down another platoon north of the line, halting their advance for nearly 6 hours. No one said it out loud, but the fear was clear. These weren't random shots from nervous soldiers. These were practiced professionals with the patience of monks and the precision of executioners. Once they took a position, they owned it. Malloy cleaned a bead of moisture from his scope, then swept the tree line with his eyes. Something about the jungle bothered him. The branches moved too unevenly in the wind. Birds fled and never returned. The silence was unnatural, like a held breath. Sergeant Devlin approached, his face streaked with grime and rain. "Malloy," he said, jerking his chin toward the rifle. "You dial that thing in yet?" "Close," Malloy answered without looking up. "Needs a few more clicks." Devlin smirked. "Better hope the enemy doesn't wait for you to finish engineering it." Behind him, a few Marines chuckled. Malloy simply tightened the last turret and sealed the scope cap. He had already decided he didn't need to answer sarcasm. The jungle would provide his response soon enough. The platoon pushed forward, hacking through vines thicker than wrists and stepping over roots that rose like the spines of buried animals. The ground sloped upward toward a ridge where Japanese forces had been sighted days earlier. The terrain funneled into a narrow corridor flanked by cliffs and dense foliage, exactly the kind of place snipers like to haunt. Private Bennett, the radio man, whispered, "Feels wrong up there." "It's all wrong," Devlin replied. "Move anyway." Malloy felt the wrongness too. The canopy dimmed the light until everything looked watercolor soft. The air tasted metallic. Even the rain lost its sound, swallowed by the heavy stillness. They had advanced less than 50 yards when the first shot rang out. It struck the lead scout in the shoulder and knocked him off his feet. The platoon dove for cover, splashing into the mud in a tangle of limbs and gear. Another round cracked through the branches overhead, sending a shower of leaves spiraling down. "Sniper!" someone shouted. No one needed the warning. The forest had already confirmed it. Devlin crawled beside Malloy. "Direction?" Malloy listened. He let the echo fade and focused on the tail end of the report, a faint vibration rolling through the hollow space between 2 outcroppings. "High ridge," he murmured. "Left side. Probably 50, maybe 60 feet up." "You sure?" "Only one way to check." Malloy slipped his rifle from its wrap, wiping away a thin sheen of moisture. He didn't rush. Panic made hands sloppy. Sloppy hands missed shots and got people killed. He eased himself behind a fallen log slick with moss, unsnapped his scope cover, and nestled the stock into his shoulder. The jungle was a maze of green and shadow, but Malloy didn't search for a silhouette. Snipers rarely revealed their bodies. He searched for something else, an unnatural line, a break in the randomness of nature. A place where light curved wrong. A patch of darkness too solid to be mere shadow. Devlin tapped his boot. "We can call for mortar support," he whispered. "Blast the whole ridge." Malloy shook his head. "Too wide. We'd never hit him." "What if he hits us first?" Malloy didn't answer. He found the ridge through his scope. Tree limbs layered over one another like tangled ribs. Leaves fluttered with the shifting wind. But something about one patch of bark seemed stiff. Too smooth. Too deliberate. He waited. Rain dripped from a vine. A bird flapped away. Then, for less than a second, a sliver of metal glinted between 2 wet leaves. Malloy exhaled steadily. His trigger broke like a glass thread. A small puff of mist burst from the ridge. A body tumbled from the branch and disappeared into the ferns below. The shot was so precise that no one spoke for several seconds. Then Bennett whispered, "I'll be damned." Devlin let out a breath he'd been holding. "All right, Malloy," he said softly. "That's one." But the jungle didn't give them time to celebrate. Another shot cracked from across the ravine, taking a chunk out of the dirt inches from Bennett's hand. "Second shooter," someone yelled. Malloy ducked back down, mud splattering across his helmet. His heart hammered, but not from fear. He understood something the others didn't. A sniper rarely worked alone in terrain this hostile. The first had been the lure, the second was the executioner. Malloy scanned the ravine with narrowed eyes. This sniper was smarter. No metallic glint, no misplaced shadow. The shot had come from deeper concealment. Even the echo sounded muted. He whispered to Devlin, We need to draw him out. How? Movement. No chance. Malloy shifted slightly. I'll take the risk. Devlin grabbed his sleeve. Kit, you just saved us once. Don't get reckless. It's not reckless if it's calculated. He lifted a branch beside him and let it sway, mimicking the outline of a rising helmet. A shot blasted the tip clean off. The bark smoked. The round had come from high in a narrow cleft of rock, almost invisible between two massive trees. Malloy rotated his body, bracing his elbows in the mud. The angle was brutal, just a sliver, impossible to see with naked eyes. But he didn't need to see the sniper. He needed to see the path the bullet had carved through the bark. He lined up his scope to that invisible line, following it back like a map. A faint ripple of fog drifted where breath should not have been. He fired. This time there was no visible fall. No cry. Only silence. The Marines waited. Nothing moved. Devlin whispered, "Did you get him?" Malloy kept the scope raised. "If he's alive, he's wounded. Either way, he's out." That silence, heavy, final, gave them the chance to pull the wounded scout back and push forward before more marksmen could reposition. The next 2 days felt like moving through a dream stitched together by gunpowder and exhaustion. Malloy had earned respect, but the jungle didn't care about respect. It cared only about silence, angles, and the patience to wait for the moment when hope unclenched its grip. On December 8th, while escorting a supply line through a flooded ravine, another sniper struck. This one perched inside a hollowed tree trunk, using moss to mask the muzzle flash. He killed a corporal instantly and wounded a machine gunner before anyone knew where the shots were coming from. The platoon scrambled behind rotting logs. Malloy crawled to higher ground, using soaking vines as ropes. He reached a ridge slick with mud and nearly lost his footing. When he finally stabilized, he spotted a slight disturbance inside one of the trunks, a shadow that trembled half a second too late. His shot pierced the hollow. The sniper collapsed forward, half falling out of the tree. That was number 3. By midday, they encountered a fourth sniper hidden beneath a camouflage tarp suspended between branches. The position was masterfully constructed. Just a ripple in the leaves, indistinguishable to anyone not searching for imperfections in the way fabric caught the wind. Malloy took a single breath and fired. The tarp sagged. That was number 4. But as the sun fell, the jungle reminded them that every victory carved a deeper scar into the next encounter. Malloy knew the snipers were studying his responses, learning his timing, adjusting their concealment to challenge him. And somewhere ahead, hidden in a stretch of forest darker and quieter than the rest, 8 more waited. The platoon didn't know their names, but Japanese scouts had whispered them. These were not amateurs. They were veterans from Guadalcanal and Shanghai, marksmen trained under the strictest doctrine of imperial precision. Malloy had outmatched 4. The remaining 8 were unlike anything he had faced. And the jungle, as if sensing the shift, grew darker with every step toward them. Malloy rewound the shot in his mind. The recoil, the echo, the bark spray, they formed a line. A perfect line. He followed it up the slope, thinking not like a marksman but like a hunter. And then he located him. A faint shape between 2 fallen branches, almost indistinguishable from the moss. Only the barrel length was wrong, slightly too straight for nature. Malloy fired again. The shape jerked, then stilled. The jungle paused. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. 2 down, Devlin whispered, awe creeping into his voice. But the spotter, the third sniper, was still alive. And now he was enraged. The next shot came with terrifying accuracy. It hit so close to Malloy's boot that the mud sprayed into his face. The sniper was no longer suppressing the platoon. He was aiming for Malloy. Malloy wiped the mud from his eyes and tried to reacquire the angle. But the spotter had repositioned, abandoning the lower right nest and shifting left, using his fallen comrade's vantage points to triangulate Malloy's new location. Devlin grabbed his arm. "We're pulling back." "No," Malloy said. "If we retreat, we walk into his forward angle. He'll cut us down one by one." Devlin hesitated. Malloy had never raised his voice before. Not once. The sergeant nodded. "Then what?" Malloy checked the slope again. He couldn't see the sniper. Not even a shimmer. But he felt him. "There's one place left he can shoot from," Malloy said. "One place that gives him sight on all of us." "Where?" Malloy pointed to the thickest part of the ridge, a knotted tangle of roots and collapsed trunks, too exposed to crawl toward and too fortified to attack head-on. Devlin swore under his breath. "You can't hit him from here." "I know." "Then what do we do?" Malloy took a breath, then lifted his rifle and rolled onto his back. Devlin stared. What are you? Malloy sighted upward, directly into the canopy. Wind rattled the top branches. Water dripped in a steady rhythm. The highest limbs were jagged and twisted, forming a natural lattice above the sniper's likely position. A thought hit Devlin with sudden clarity. You're going to ricochet. Malloy didn't answer. He lined the shot with surgical precision, adjusting for angle, moisture, and deflection. It was nearly impossible. Even he knew that. But it wasn't impossible. He squeezed the trigger. The shot hit a thick branch overhead, pinged off at a sharp angle, and vanished into the foliage with a metallic thud. For a moment nothing happened. Then a cry floated through the trees, faint, thin, final. Devlin's eyes widened. No way. Malloy, you. Malloy didn't celebrate. He simply lowered his rifle and exhaled. That's 5, he whispered. The ridge fell silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't the oppressive quiet of a jungle waiting to kill them. It was the stillness that follows when a predator is removed from the world. The platoon slowly rose from their cover. Men who had crawled through mud moments earlier now stood tall, almost disbelieving the outcome. 5 snipers in less than a day. The same men who had once tapped Malloy's crates and joked about mail-order toys now looked at his rifle like it was a relic pulled from legend. But Malloy wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Because deep within the ridge, past the fallen nests and empty branches, Japanese forces were adjusting their lines. Word was spreading through their ranks. A single Marine sniper, armed with a rifle built from scraps and mail requisitions, had dismantled one of their most feared units. Their officers issued new orders. Malloy had become a priority target. And the 3 deadliest marksmen on Bougainville were already moving into position, preparing the confrontation that would define the next 48 hours, and the next century of Marine Corps marksmanship lore. The turning point wasn't that Malloy had killed 5 snipers. It was that the Japanese were now hunting him. The skies over the Pacific on that late morning patrol looked deceptively peaceful, clouds drifting lazily, sunlight flashing off the rolling blue below, yet every pilot in the P-38 formation could feel a strange electricity humming through their throttles. Something was different today. Something powerful. Something dangerous. And none of them, not even the Japanese, fully understood what was about to happen. 4 months, the Imperial Japanese Navy's A6M0 had dominated the mid-altitudes, carving up American formations with its unmatched climb rate and blistering initial acceleration. The P-38 Lightning, though fast and deadly in a dive, often lost the opening seconds of a dogfight, the seconds that mattered most. Zero pilots had grown confident, even arrogant, believing the big twin-boom American fighter was predictable. But today everything was about to break. Lieutenant Jack Donnelly sat in the cockpit of his P-38, Glacier Girl 2, fingers curled around the yoke, glancing at the engine gauges with disbelief. The turbo superchargers were running hotter and smoother than he'd ever felt. Even at cruising RPM, the engines weren't choking or sputtering when he nudged the throttle. There was no hesitation, no coughing lag, no loss of manifold pressure that usually forced him to baby the controls. Something mechanical had changed. He didn't know that deep inside each engine bay, hidden beneath metal cowling and grease-stained bolts, a small but brilliant piece of improvisation, a single tightened wire linking an overlooked wastegate linkage to a neglected boost control arm, was quietly rewriting the rules of the Pacific Air War. That wire, installed by a single stubborn mechanic who refused to accept that factory standard was good enough for combat, was about to become the center of the deadliest air duel of the month. But Jack didn't know that yet. None of the pilots did. All they knew was that command had warned them. Expect zero activity. Heavy. So when the first specks appeared over the horizon, glinting faintly in formation, Jack didn't hesitate. He clicked his mic. Bandits. 11 o'clock high. Looks like 18, maybe more. His squadron leader, Captain Harris, responded immediately. Maintain altitude. Hold formation until they commit. But the Japanese were already committing. The Zeros peeled into a dive with surgical precision. Their formation split into 3 sweeping attack wings shaped like sharpened blades cutting into the sky. For months this tactic had worked flawlessly. They would dive past the lightning formation, force the Americans to maneuver, then climb sharply to regain altitude, something the P-38s normally struggled to match. Jack braced himself. He'd seen this dance too many times. Zeros dive, lightnings dodge, Zeros climb, lightnings fall behind. Round after round, sortie after sortie. But today, something felt impossibly different. As the Zeros thundered downward, their engines screaming in a tight downward spiral, Jack eased his throttles forward in preparation for a defensive turn. Except, there was no lag, no stutter, no uneven mixture. Instead, the P-38's Allisons responded like a beast finally awake after a long sleep. The aircraft didn't just speed up, it surged forward with raw, immediate power. The nose lifted smoothly. The twin engines roared as one. Jack blinked hard. What the hell? The rush was instantaneous, electrifying. His P-38 wasn't behaving like a heavy twin-engine fighter. It was behaving like a predator. He pulled harder on the throttle, normally a risky move at this altitude. He expected the usual hesitation, the familiar dead spot, where manifold pressure fought against the turbo wastegate lag. But the lag was gone. Completely gone. Behind him, Captain Harris let out a low whistle over the radio. Boys, do you feel that? They all felt it. The entire formation realized the same truth in the same breath. The P-38 Lightning had just become a different airplane. Down below, the leading Japanese squadron commander, Lieutenant Saburo Kashima, realized something was wrong long before he understood why. The American formation wasn't scattering. It wasn't breaking in panic under the classic zero-pressure dive. Instead, the P-38s were turning into them, climbing into the attack path with an acceleration he had never seen. He narrowed his eyes. Impossible. Not at this altitude. Not with aircraft that heavy. He pushed his throttle full forward, trying to maintain his energy advantage, but a cold tremor worked through his spine. Something was off. Terribly off. The Americans were climbing too fast. Jack's P-38 shot upward, slicing into the intercept angle with a smoothness he had never experienced. He caught a fleeting view of the leading Zeros flashing past him, white sun reflecting off their canopies. Their pilots looked shocked. When had the Lightning ever met them head-on with this kind of speed? Jack felt it before he saw it. He was no longer fighting to match the Zeros. He was outpacing them. He rolled inverted, dove slightly to pick up speed, and pulled into a tight arc behind a trailing Zero that clearly hadn't expected an American fighter to recover so aggressively. His crosshairs centered. He squeezed the trigger. The nose cannon spat a clean burst. The Zero shredded instantly, engine tearing apart, smoke spiraling as the aircraft plunged toward the sea. Jack's voice exploded into his headset. Splash 1-0. But he had no time to celebrate. All around him, the sky had erupted into chaotic motion. The Zeros tried to regain their altitude advantage, but as they pulled up into their habitual escape climb, the Lightnings followed, easily, smoothly, relentlessly. And that's when the truth hit Jack like a shockwave. We're climbing with them. We're climbing faster than them. Every P-38 pilot in the formation was saying some version of the same thing. How is this possible? What the hell did maintenance do to these engines? Boys, the Lightning woke up. Thousands of feet below, unaware of what was unfolding above, Chief Mechanic Robert "Red" Yates stood on the airstrip with his arms folded, squinting into the sky. He had no idea that his improvised wire trick, which he'd spent nights arguing about with other crew chiefs, was now being tested in the most brutal laboratory imaginable, real combat. He had tightened a simple wire to fix a sluggish wastegate mechanism, the tiny mechanical arm that controlled turbo boost response. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't factory approved. It wasn't even technically regulation compliant. But it worked. And in the skies above, it was rewriting survival odds. Yates didn't know yet, but at this exact moment, Japanese pilots were discovering something terrifying. The P-38 Lightning could now outrun, outclimb, and out-accelerate the Zero in the first seconds of combat, the exact seconds that determine life or death. It was as if the Americans had suddenly gained a secret supercharger setting the Japanese didn't understand. Lieutenant Kashima tried to pull his remaining fighters back into an organized climb. The air around him vibrated with tracers, metal fragments, and spiraling fighters. He throttled hard. The engine roared. But something was wrong. The Americans were closing the gap. He had never seen this before. Zero doctrine relied on controlling the vertical space, controlling the climb rate. Yet here were the P-38s, those big, heavy, supposedly sluggish machines, climbing after him like silver wolves. He banked sharply, trying to break the pattern. 2 Lightnings followed. Effortlessly. Kashima's heart hammered. He snapped into a barrel roll, diving to regain control of the fight. Behind him, Captain Harris shouted. He's rolling left. Stay tight, stay tight. Jack followed Harris into the maneuver. The P-38 responded with brutal precision. There was no lag when he demanded more power, no choking hesitation. The throttles felt like direct conduits to raw energy. He matched the Zero's roll. He matched its dive. He matched its turn radius, something the Lightning had rarely been able to do with confidence. Kashima looked back over his shoulder and felt cold fear rise in his throat. The American is still there. Right there. Why isn't he falling behind? He snapped his stick, trying a climbing spiral escape, the maneuver that normally left American fighters wallowing in the air. But this time, the P-38 surged upward with him, then past him. Jack gained position. He fired. The cannon burst tore through the Zero's fuselage, punching flames out the opposite side. Kashima's aircraft spun out of control, smoke trailing behind it in a black ribbon as it dropped toward the sea. The Japanese formation broke. The psychological shift was devastating. For the first time in the campaign, Zero pilots were retreating, not to climb and strike again but to flee. And the Lightnings, faster than ever, went after them. Jack leveled out and spotted two Zeros bolting east, engines screaming as they tried to flee into cloud cover. Normally this was where the chase ended. The Zeros would outrun the P-38s in the initial acceleration burst and simply slip away. But not today. Jack advanced throttle. The engines responded instantly. The turbo boost surged with perfect timing. The Lightning shot forward. "What the, Jack, you're closing!" Harris yelled. "You're actually closing on them." Jack blinked. The range was shrinking second by second. He fired a long burst. Another Zero disintegrated. The last one tried a desperate defensive dive. Jack dove after him. The Zero pilot expected the P-38 to struggle with compressibility at high speed. But the improved throttle response gave Jack better control entering the dive. The Lightning stayed steady, poised, lethal. The final Zero burst into flame as Jack fired one last volley. Silence swept the radio for a moment. Then Harris spoke, voice half awe, half disbelief. "Boys, I don't know what maintenance did to these birds, but we just tore apart an entire Zero squadron." As the surviving P-38s regrouped and headed home, Jack looked at the empty horizon behind them. No Zeros in pursuit. No last-minute ambushes. No desperate climbs. For the first time in weeks, the Pacific sky belonged to them. When they landed, mechanics ran out to greet the returning pilots. Jack spotted Red Yates, the stubborn mechanic who had fought so hard for his strange little wire fix. Yates folded his arms, chewing the end of a pencil, pretending not to be proud. Jack climbed out of his cockpit and shouted across the tarmac. "Red, I don't know what the hell you did, but these engines woke up today." Yates shrugged, trying to hide a grin. "Just tightened a wire nobody cared about." Harris walked over, helmet still in hand, and clapped Yates on the shoulder. "That wire nobody cared about just changed the whole damn war in the air." And though no one realized it yet, history had just pivoted on one of the smallest mechanical improvisations ever made in combat aviation. The roar of the P-38 engines had faded, leaving the airfield slick with sweat, oil, and exhaustion. Pilots climbed out of cockpits, legs trembling, lungs heaving, not just from the adrenaline but from the sheer disbelief of what had just happened. Every man in the squadron carried the same unspoken thought. The aircraft they had known for months, heavy and awkward, had transformed into something unrecognizable. Something extraordinary. Lieutenant Jack Donnelly trudged across the tarmac, boots splashing in mud and pooled rainwater. The smell of burning fuel from engines worked at max throttle still lingered. Around him, his fellow pilots exchanged stunned glances. Words felt inadequate. How could they describe the impossible performance they had just witnessed? How could they explain that, for the first time in the Pacific, they had outpaced the legendary Zero in climb, dive, and acceleration, all in the opening seconds of combat? Mechanic Robert Red Yates stood near the hangar, sleeves rolled up, hands still stained with oil. He had watched the dogfight unfold through binoculars, never fully believing it until Jack's P-38s descended from the clouds one by one victorious. No pilots had died. No Zeros had escaped without consequences. And all because of a single wire he had installed, quietly and stubbornly, months before. Red shrugged when pilots ran over to congratulate him. "Just a wire," he muttered. But the impact was far from minor. That small adjustment had solved the throttling delay that haunted the twin Allison engines for years. It had allowed pilots to accelerate and climb instantaneously, precisely the maneuvers that Zero pilots relied on Americans not being able to perform. One improvised wire had shifted the balance of power. The squadron commander, Captain Harris, finally approached Red, his expression half amusement, half reverence. "Do you know what just happened out there?" he asked. "You changed the game. You gave our pilots the edge they never had against these Zero aces." Red shook his head. "I just tightened a wire. That's all." but even he felt the weight of what had occurred. Over the next few hours, intelligence officers began piecing together reports from multiple squadrons. Word spread quickly. P-38 Lightnings had intercepted a formation of over a dozen Zeros, engaged them head-on, and destroyed nearly half without losing a single aircraft. The stories repeated the same incredulous details: rapid climbs, immediate throttle response, precise handling in every maneuver. Everywhere the mechanic's stupid wire was suddenly being discussed in hushed tones, cited as the difference between disaster and triumph. Meanwhile, Red went about his work as if nothing had happened. To him, the wire was only a fix, a logical solution to a minor mechanical quirk. Yet history, as it often does, had a way of elevating small actions into legendary outcomes. His work ensured not just a tactical advantage but a psychological one. Japanese pilots who had once been untouchable now found themselves being chased, outmaneuvered, and destroyed in moments that had once felt impossible. For the pilots, the impact was immediate and profound. The confidence of the squadron surged. No longer would they hesitate, worrying that their Lightnings could be outclimbed in the first critical seconds of engagement. Tactics evolved overnight. Formation flying shifted to take full advantage of the newfound power. Pilots experimented with aggressive vertical maneuvers, confident that the P-38 would respond instantly. Every sortie carried a renewed sense of possibility and morale soared. Even beyond the squadron, the ripple effects began to show. Reports from other airfields noted similar performance boosts when mechanics replicated Red's fix. Manuals were updated. Training programs adapted. The wire that had once been an overlooked improvisation became a small but crucial detail in the ongoing Pacific campaign. One man's persistence and careful observation had quietly tipped the scales of aerial warfare. In the aftermath, the P-38 pilots celebrated in subdued relief, aware that combat had only become more dangerous in general, but grateful that they now had an edge. Each pilot knew that skill mattered, but so did reliability. That wire had done more than tweak an engine, it had preserved life. It had allowed American airmen to challenge the previously invincible Zero on equal terms. And though medals and official recognition would eventually follow, the real victory was simple. Men lived because of foresight, ingenuity, and relentless attention to detail. The story of that wire, of that improvisation, would echo in hangars, briefing rooms, and airstrips for months, sometimes whispered with awe, sometimes laughed at incredulously, but always remembered. By evening, the airfield settled into quiet. Engines cooled and mechanics like Red packed away their tools. Pilots filed reports and recounted the events to anyone who would listen, their voices still tinged with disbelief. Somewhere in the distance, the Pacific shimmered in golden light, oblivious to the revolution in the sky that had taken place just hours before. The lesson was clear. Even the smallest act, the tiniest adjustment, could ripple outward to change the course of battle. One wire, installed carefully in the bowels of a Lightning, had reshaped the war overhead. The planes returned to the air, more deadly and precise than ever. And though the Japanese had once thought their Zeros invincible, they would now have to contend with an enemy whose ingenuity was as lethal as its firepower. That night, as the pilots removed their helmets and cleaned their weapons, they understood a truth that would stay with them forever. Sometimes victory comes not from overwhelming force or grand design, but from the quiet work of a single mind willing to see possibility where everyone else sees limitation. And above all, the P-38s waited, engines ready, their newfound agility a testament to human skill, courage, and the tiny wire that had turned ordinary war machines into extraordinary instruments of survival. In the quiet that followed the battles, amid the smell of rain-soaked metal and scorched earth, one truth became impossible to ignore. Small acts can wield monumental power. A single wire, carefully tightened by a solitary mechanic, had shifted the balance of an entire air campaign. It was a reminder that innovation rarely arrives in grand proclamations or shiny prototypes. Often, it hides in quiet corners, in the hands of someone willing to notice what others overlook. Pilots spoke of the change in the P-38 as if it were alive. It climbed faster. It responded instantly. It dared to defy expectations. And though the Japanese Zeros were deadly, now they were faced with an adversary they could neither outpace nor underestimate. The jungle, the islands, and the sky itself had been rewritten by human ingenuity, the perfect alignment of observation, skill, and courage. For Lieutenant Donnelly and his squadron, the victory was more than tactical. It was psychological. They had learned to trust not only their instincts but also the meticulous care of the men who labored behind the scenes, mechanics who never sought glory but whose work could decide life or death. Every mission after Bougainville carried the confidence that comes from knowing the odds had been subtly but irrevocably tilted in their favor. Robert "Red" Yates returned to his routine, yet his quiet triumph left a lasting legacy. That wire became a symbol: ingenuity in service of survival, foresight in the chaos of war, the understated brilliance of those who work unseen. Historians would later marvel at the shift in air combat that December, at how a squadron of P-38s suddenly outperformed the seemingly invincible Zero. Few realized it began with a small, stubborn act in a dimly lit hangar. In the end, Bougainville was more than a battle. It was a lesson etched into the history of warfare. Innovation can be as decisive as courage, precision as powerful as numbers, and the smallest details can save countless lives. For every pilot who climbed into the cockpit that morning, and every mechanic who labored in the mud and grease, the truth was clear: greatness often arrives quietly, almost invisibly, yet its impact resonates for decades. And somewhere, in the roar of the Pacific wind over a distant island, the P-38 still seemed to hum with the memory of that moment. Proof that even in war, brilliance could rise from the simplest, most unassuming place. A single wire tightened just right that made the impossible inevitable.